and that we, continue to sort of live, learn, and share on those lands. I would also like to say thanks to Glendora and the program team for really doing a great job to get these talks organized and to get them populated with people. We know that it's difficult times to get people out, even virtually nowadays. So thanks, Glendora, for all your hard work to get it organized. And of course, thanks to Dr. Peter Ryan, who's going to be talking today about building trust in low trust contexts. Dr. Peter Ryan is an assistant professor. I'm just pulling up your bio here, Peter. In the Department of Public Relations at Mount Royal University. He's also currently at the Canadian Public Relations Society. He's an elected board member and also part of the education portfolio and a member on the advisory board for the Center of Crisis and Risk Communication. Dr. Ryan completed both his BA and his MA at the University of Alberta before moving to Toronto to accept a Rogers PhD fellowship in the joint Ryerson York University Communication and Culture program. Dr. Ryan's research interests include Canadian and US political communication, government, public relations, digital research methods, and social media issues management. He's published widely and presented nationally and internationally, and he's also done some really crazy, awesome overland treks in Africa, maybe later on we can talk about, but he's also very well traveled and adventurous fellow. And so it's with great gratitude that I welcome Dr. Ryan here, and I will turn the floor over to him, and maybe we can just throw a bunch of claps into the chat or highs or whatever, so that we know that we are acknowledging Dr. Ryan's presence. And there you go, Peter. Thanks very much.
Thank you kindly, folks. Thanks for that great introduction, Jason. I'd also say, I think maybe some of you might know Dr. Jagras Hodson. We did our grad work together pretty much and worked on a team together at Ryerson while we were there. So there are some links with Royal Roads there as well. And I'm really interested in giving this talk today with folks from Royal Roads, especially because I've done similar talks with Ryerson, Oxford, UC, and U of A. So I want to take it all across Canada now to the West Coast, and we'll see what your grad students are doing and what you think about this topic today. And I'm really looking forward to this opportunity. The slides, hopefully everyone will have a copy of the link for afterwards, because part of what I do here, I have a bit of an instructional design background, and you'll see I'll keep the slide notes open on the bottom a bit. Some people might be able to see on their screens or not, but just trying to also demonstrate, some good teaching pedagogy during the online environment. If you want to steal any of the tools today, I try to make everything as open as possible. Share the knowledge, move it forward so we can get through the pandemic. We can see the end of the pandemic coming, hopefully with at least 3 or 4 vaccines coming in January, folks. So if you're struggling at this point, really hoping that we continue to support each other to get through this. And working with Jason and Center for Crisis and Risk Communication, national organization here, we've been working on a lot of supports across the country and internationally to hopefully get us through this in a safe and efficient way, supporting one another. I've got a few things that I will build off of to give you both theory and some practice in our meeting today, in our session today. And if you don't have any of these readings you haven't seen before, don't worry. I've got the notes and the slides, and if you don't remember anything I say today, you can always come back and refer or contact me afterwards. That's how I can support you if any of these tools work well for you. either when we're back in person or in the online environment. That's how this is designed. So keep that in mind. And I'm going to talk you through a bit of what I hope to do in the session today. So first, I'm going to talk us through something called Advocacy Coalition Frameworks. It's a theory of how you can get community groups, stakeholders, and organizations to work together in low trust environments, like controversial issues. How do you work with people to build consensus and move forward on a project, whether it's just one controversial issue or a whole pandemic? So we're going to get some tools theoretically, and then we're going to do, if the link works, a little bit of practice, a little bit of doing to pull interest out of qualitative interviews, qualitative documents, and build consensus from those as if we were in the room. So whether it be a town hall, an organizational meeting, an investors relations meeting, you can just imagine how these tools can play out. And that comes from a reading by Pierce, Peterson, Jones, Gerard, and Fu. Then I'm going to go on and show you the consensus building workshop method if you haven't used that for any form of ACF modeling of practice. It's just one tactic versus the theoretical strategy that we'll talk through. Then we will look at how to visualize practical stakeholder options using an article by Glennon, Rufflet, and Baba. I've used this as a jumping off point for people in communications and PR practitioners especially. In PR, we're option machines. We want to be able to present options to our clients, to our organizations, so that they can have a broader view of how they can deal with an issue and then focus in on the one that makes sense for them. PR people will then go on and support them on whichever one they choose. So this is a good way of visualizing options of helping people in town halls or in any consensus basis work to move forward together. And then we'll have a little simulation using that model. So that's basically what I hope we'll do today in this session. Feel free, if you have questions as we go. I'm very easygoing to just ask a question for clarification. If there's any tech lag, I'm sure Jason can let me know, as I'm all the way here in Calgary right now, at home, like most of you, I'm sure. So here's our agenda. I quickly talked you through at a higher level, but first off, anyone in PR, hopefully you know the RACE formula. We're going to talk through the research, analysis, communication, and evaluation formula as a reminder, and also something to amplify the current formulation of the theory on that model that might be useful from a practice perspective. Then we'll get into the discussion of participatory deliberative processes that you can use in your practice through the theory that I presented to you very quickly. And then the ACFs, how to be an option machine, but also support yourself to be resilient as a person that might have to walk into a town hall, organize it, and ensure that all voices are heard in a diplomatic way. That's going to be the very practical component of working off of Advocacy Coalition Frameworks. And then we'll get into the simulation. So if that sounds like an agenda, I'm going to keep proceeding unless I hear otherwise. So we got a quick visualization, which unfortunately it looks like even on my end, Google has downgraded. Sometimes they downgrade the image after a little bit, but if I zoom in, zoom out, it might be better. The real thing up here that I just want to amplify in recent work by Guth and Marsh, it breaks down the RACE formula away from just a linear model. If any of you have used that to write a communication plan before, if you're involved in the Canadian Public Relations Society or IABC, any of those professional groups for communications and PR, you have to write a communication plan to become an accredited member. And they use the RACE model for it. Hopefully everyone knows what I'm talking about. And it's very linear. But Guth and Marsh argue, especially in a policy background, we can think through any comms plan and it is not linear. Like while we're doing our research, we will also be doing some planning, and the planning might change the research process. And it might also change when we are writing our communications. As we know, it's dynamic, right? They really fill out the model as being dynamic, but then they root it in the values of an organization. So anyone you're working with in any sector, whether it's private, public, or nonprofit, you want to be using the race model to come up with solutions that are rooted in the values, the mission statement, those sorts of things that are already aligned with the brand of that organization. So hopefully it just is a quick reminder of how even something in PR as old as the race model can be modified and changed into something more dynamic than a linear model. So one of my notes here is reminding me that professional communicators, whether you're going to go on and get the PhD or when you graduate, you're going to the professional world, we know that when communication goes well, then a strong brand and a trusted reputation are created. However, when communications go poorly, then terms of skepticism like spin doctor or policy wonk arise for sticking too closely to the theory, which lay people might not understand. So hopefully I'll be demonstrating some of the practices today to avoid consequences in your professional careers, like becoming called spin doctors or too policy wonk focused or too much of an academic. But you can judge whether or not we get there. And whether or not I'm just being an accredited spin doctor in that regard. And if you, want to look at a full comp plan, there's a link here if that's not an area that you've worked in professionally to explore how the race model can be used in a more robust way if this is something new to you or you just have come from an academic focus. But I'll let that be there for you to explore afterwards in the slides. For now, I'm going to start off with the theory, some definitions we can use. In a piece by Buat and Escobar's work, the Sustainability Communities Act was a process that provided an important participatory deliberative process innovation example because of the following three contributions. First, it's an agenda setting process. So you're helping an organization set their priorities and then how to communicate, hopefully via the media, to get their message out. It's a multi-level process so that it's not just a one-stop shop. You collect some data and do some qualitative research, then have some outputs. It's not that, it's ongoing, going back and forth between stakeholders in the community. And it has a statutory link to decision-making, meaning that in this example, there was a legal framework from the government behind it in terms of, there's a policy framework behind it. It's not just one group ad hoc coming up with some rules for how to work with stakeholders. That they wanted to have a clear report and outcomes that could be communicated back to the government in this example. So could be a good theoretical source going forwards. I'm just want to really pull out some key definitions. So PDP, what it does is it seeks to increase the effectiveness and quality of policymaking by involving citizens in policy. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Hopefully a bit of common sense there. But it does a bit more. It combines both direct and discursive forms of participation, meaning in-person dialogue that could be recorded, and discursive is any record of a discussion. So it could include online surveys, social media, links for two-way communication, records, anything that might help more people engage in the development of a policy. It also encompasses a wide range of processes from participatory budgeting to many public discussions in town halls and some forms of online crowdsourcing. So overall, though, it's affected by two factors in their research: how you design it, and then what actually happens in the interactions in the context of working on an issue. So we've got a bit of theory that we can now use about PDPs. And I'm going to build off of that by looking at one example of a strategic framework that you could use or you might have heard about before, which is Advocacy Coalition Frameworks, ACFs. So I have already briefly discussed Pierce, Peterson, Jones, Gerard, and Vu's article called There and Back Again that looks at from 1986 to 2006, a lot of theory on ACFs and how they've been implemented. So they analyzed 80 applications from it over that 30-year period, 30 years? Yeah, quick 20 years, sorry. Let me quickly do the math. And they said that many applications of it fall short of the original ACF theorist Sabatier's lofty goals to have multiple stakeholders influence policy creation. Often the designs were too limited, is what they find, saying that, well, you can have lofty designs, but if you only have 1 or 2 meetings and you don't follow up after a policy has been created, then it's not going to be as effective, potentially, as the original theorist had hoped. So since 2007, the ACF has developed new concepts and has been cited over 1,000 times. So it's well used in political engagement around the globe. And their paper's goal was to seek balance between generalizable applications of the framework and problem-focused applications relevant to particular contexts, servicing policy goals, policy issues that you wanted to resolve or have a solution to. So overall, in short, ACFs are theories of how to create useful groups for getting input and making decisions around policy creation through implementation to eventually the evaluation of the overall project process. And that they are groups of policy actors, so probably people like you or I, with some core values and beliefs that we want to coordinate and have other people influence the policy process. So again, some general definitions to get us going. Now we start to get into the practical. So the first practical finding that they had in their article was that overall, ACFs are predominantly used in the environment and energy industry out of their review of articles published. But you can see they're widely used across all policy areas. They also found that it was mostly used at national government levels because they have more funds to support that kind of in-depth engagement versus just a one-off survey or opinion poll, because it is very involved to have multiple town halls, multiple focus groups that would include repeat evaluations and feedback from the stakeholders. Whereas I think it's pretty common knowledge for anyone that works in the climate science area, that or oil and gas or green energy, any of the industry in fact, especially coming pure from Alberta, that this is a top way when you're going into low trust environments. It could be with landowners, farmers, ranchers, anyone concerned about the environment, that you need to create open discussion and have a record of it going forward so that it could meet the CER, AER, the energy regulator standards for any energy project, green or fossil fuel, to move forward. So that's what we're going to do today in the simulation. I'm going to focus on that area, especially coming from Alberta, and BC obviously has huge energy holdings as well. That might be useful just to focus on that top area for ACFs today. So their work goes on, and in their review, they identified 4 major pathways to policy change within any policy subsystem in government, or it could be organizational policies internal to a corporation. Of course, depending how large an organization is, this can also be useful internal to organizations to build consensus among staff and employees. The 4 different pathways that might lead to policy change, they're definitely reminiscent of something else you might have seen in policy, in the policy cycle or agenda setting research, which is Kingdon's policy windows, which there's also 4 of those. So I'm going to explore, just compare the 2 theories for how ACFs actually work into a combination of either agenda setting theory, if that's helpful for you, or just policy change in general. And then we'll get into the actual practice of it. So first off, external shocks, anything that can happen in the policy environment. Obviously, that could be something as big as 9/11 that changed all of security at the federal level, not just in Canada, but around the globe. Internal subsystem events. These can be big or small, but at the federal level, we could think about what's happening with the We Charity at the committee level and the investigations into that. Policy-oriented learning. This could just be a policy review. This is one of the pathways: regular policy review, regular policy window, and lastly, negotiated agreements, which is what we're going to focus on in the crisis simulation. So just to compare it again to something like Kingdon's agenda setting theory, where you have multiple or 4 types of policy windows that can open, we can quickly talk through this and compare it to agenda setting theory. So this diagram comes from a 2007 work from Tomlin, Helmer, and Hampson. So any kind of policy that you want to influence and get changed, kind of could be a COVID health protocol, like I was talking about at the beginning of this session. And it will work through one of these streams, but eventually the streams have to combine, and there's going to be a champion of that new policy or the policy change before that policy entrepreneur or champion works with one of those 4 policy windows to get the actual policy on the agenda of the government, or out the other side if it's being implemented and it's already been passed as law, or there's a regulatory framework. So you could see that ACFs would fit in. It could fit in anywhere along here, trying to build up support for a policy champion or get ready for when a policy window opens. Really, it's a strategy that can come in from any of the problem streams. That's a problem that happens in the policy environment, a policy stream, or the politics stream. So hopefully the diagram just helps complement, gives us a bit more of a robust view for where ACFs as a strategy can get involved in the process at any point to eventually help create a finished policy. Is there something else? Oh yeah, I want to talk you through the 4 Kingdon policy windows. So you've got routinized policy windows, the spillover policy windows, discretionary political windows, and random problem windows that can open up an opportunity for a policy champion or a political party, if it's on their agenda, to get a policy created. So these are the things that you would look in the parliamentary schedule at the federal level, looking at what the government's speech from the throne is, to actively try and change a policy or add a new policy in. And I've given you a bunch of examples of each of these windows. Hopefully, I'm thinking if most people are at the grad level, you've hopefully heard about these windows, but ask me for examples if it's too theoretical at this point. But now I'm going to get into the doing. So for anyone that works writing comms or PR, this has been something I know our grads have come back to me and said, anywhere I've gone for work placements or when I've graduated, and they all get 100% employment, knock on wood, that keeps going during the pandemic. When they're done, often they're hired right out of our program in their 3rd year during their work placements. But they say this is one of the things that they were fortunate to share in our classes together in. And it's a thing to present to any organization for how you can use an ACF or any town hall to create hopefully a meaningful outcome, if even a policy out of it. This is from Delannon, Ralphlett, and Baba, going back to 2016, so it's fairly new. And I'll provide 2 examples of practical skills here to help build some form of consensus with groups in low trust policy areas. So to provide a menu here, to help create coalitions with a clear visualization of possible transparently created paths, or provide them to groups when working with them. You can come in with a menu prepared saying, what would you hope to get out of the meeting today? These are the options we can see. And they come up with 3 basic ones from their review of projects and literature. First off, transactional, that's pretty straightforward. You're exchanging something. It could be from the corporate stance, you're giving back to the community, charitable donation, just outright giving money is one way. From the organization to the community, could affect many community partners to get a policy or deal done. And the frequency of it is occasional, but it's usually just one-offs. Once a deal is made, it's done. The second menu option or practical strategy for community engagement would be a transitional engagement. So this is two-way limited bridges between groups. So the example would be an ACF or town hall model right there, because it's going back and forth between 2 or more groups. It takes a lot more input. The tactics that you can use to let your strategy build to more community involvement would include stakeholder dialogues, public consultations, town hall, or cause or issue related marketing of some form. And the last menu option that they come up with is some form of transformational engagement, which really is a joint project. It involves joint and co-ownership as an option, still two-way community engagement. And it's far more infrequent that people, and especially private organizations, would like to do this, because usually private organizations want to own everything. But it also takes far more resources and more frequent interaction to get to the final goal, deal, or policy. So in their generous summary, they give us, here's 3 menu options, but then they come up with a 4th. And the 4th would be an integrative strategy. Hopefully you can see that. But generally they're just saying it's a mix of all the other different menu options we've seen happen before in companies. But in their review of companies using it as an option, there was only 2, whereas they came up with, but most companies were using some form of transitional engagement in their review of stakeholder groups that were successful in creating an outcome or policy. So like I said, from a practical perspective, you could just quickly create, whether it's a Google Doc or a highly polished report that will include different options for engagement with stakeholders. And that's what our students come back and tell us, so useful, especially for smaller organizations that haven't had someone trained up on these latest techniques, to come in and say, yeah, we've got enough money for a full-blown integrational engagement strategy, or no, let's just do transactional. This one makes the most sense. It also takes some of the burden off of people in PR as being the spin doctors, because then if they're an option machine, it's always the client or the organization that's choosing out of those options. That's also, I think, a lot of early career PR people like it, because they don't just come up with one solution, they come up with 4 and allow their boss, stakeholders, or supervisor to come up with the option to take off some of the burden of that ultimate decision. But it makes it more transparent, and it builds trust by showing you're a professional. You've thought through this, and it's just a draft. So you can keep developing it with more input through something like the ACF process. But something that they also found in their review, and this links also with another work by Delanna Popper, who focuses on sustainability and community engagement in her work, that says for most people that work in comms and PR, stakeholder engagement sessions are only used about 5% of the time. Like, that's how much resources are involved in that process, that it's so resource intensive and time intensive that a lot of organizations don't choose it as the primary stakeholder engagement strategy. So From PR news, what is being chosen? Well, what as most important to stakeholders? Well, just focusing right on your customers through marketing and sales, the communities where they operate, employees, any influentials, especially influencers on social media, consumers, governments, nonprofits. So they focus on their business as usual. And the last thing that they focus on is the highly intensive community engagement strategies. But during periods, or during communications with low trust environments, those aren't effective. That's the other finding. So if we're going to focus here on a particular area, I said we would focus on energy. I asked this question, okay, who are the key energy stakeholders in Canada? What is their history? It should be down here on this line. Can change that on the fly as I go. And we're going to start to think through that collectively. On the next slide, we've got a common list. This is taken right from good old-fashioned PR strategic management textbook from Smith and a few other resources. So if we know who the stakeholders are, just by looking at previous projects, there might be new ones, but generally this is a good list for us and a reminder to check. Okay, we've got our 4 options created for some community engagement. We're going to have a town hall. We want to see how much buy-in we can get or new ideas we can create from a town hall. Let's make sure all the stakeholders that we engage with, we have a record that they have communicated about the project so that we can show our professionalism and our authority on the subject, legitimize the whole process. These are the hopes that will help create a brand in a low trust environment. I'm going to focus in on Indigenous relations as an example shortly. I think, how are we doing for time here? Oh, good, this is right on time. Okay, so out of the stakeholder groups here, I'm going to focus on a potentially low trust environment and one that we've seen in the news recently over the past year. So that is very practical. You can see often we learn the most from controversial topics, and that's what my hope would be, that we can focus on that and work together. Okay, so we've got our framework, a quick design for what we hope to get out of having a town hall or using an SACF framework for meeting with people. The general design I'm proposing is that we're going to use something called the consensus-based workshop method. And I'm not sure if in the chat or something, if anyone can type in there, have you heard of the consensus-based workshop method before? Just like quick show of interest. If there's any yeses, type in a yes. Are we seeing any yeses out there? Oh, let me open my chat. Crickets, nope, okay, that's good to know. Okay, well, there's another tool for your tool bag today that hopefully will be useful. You know, it's definitely inspired by political governance decisions, folks, and especially in Nunavut, you know, they use consensus-based government. If you're not aware of that, it's a different approach versus a democratic form, and it's really a refined version of it. So it might be useful to have in your toolkit, your communication and PR toolkit going forward. And the goal is to take personality and emotion out of high potential issues being discussed in person. It's really to focus on interests and brainstorm the interests, then see if there's any easy wins or surprising things that people weren't aware there was common ground on. So we can say in the literature, it's used for political governance decisions, coalition building and policy creation, which we're going to try and do, stakeholder engagement like town halls, also kind of what we're going to be doing in the simulation. And we won't get into negotiation strategies today because that's an entire other course. But there is a video here if what I'm going to talk you through on the next slide doesn't help you, that you can watch in the future. But I'm not going to take up time watching it today. Okay. So the framing question for this little simulation that we're going to do here. What would you do if your supervisor calls you in to lead and facilitate a town hall meeting that is going to include contested groups of people who do not agree with one another or hold incommensurate views? Like, they just won't agree. You already know that's going to happen. Well, here's an option. First, you set the context with some clear parameters that you're just there to brainstorm and have a discussion with the stakeholders. Keep it open and professional, and hopefully, as I say to my fourth year crisis students, you know, if you are a person that has nerves of steel, hopefully very kind, can put things in perspective, won't be easily triggered by contentious things happening in a meeting, and you can stay calm, cool, and collected and bring that to that context. That is part of the professionalism that you have to show to have everyone's ideas be heard and recorded. So setting that up as a context, generally, you know, if it's a town hall meeting, it can take 3 to 10 minutes. And there's a full extension here if you want to know where this comes from and use it in the future. But then you would just have people, you know, within the context, we're going to focus on an energy industry issue with pipelines during indigenous relations. So that would be the context of where we're going in the crisis simulation. And then we brainstorm interests from each group to say, every group, we want to hear from you. Please, you know, respect everyone as they speak. We're just going to record everything. And then once you've got a bunch of things on a board or shared on the screen, we're going to use a Google Doc. You can cluster the common interests together and just ignore the ones that are most contentious, because what you're trying to do is build consensus. And when you're clustering it, you can just use symbols. We're going to use symbols like $signs, asterisks, anything like that, to see that they're clustered together. And then you work on them by naming it. Money is an easy one, using $signs, because you say, well, this is budgetary or this is resource driven. But then there's people concerns. So you start to name them, and then you focus on the things that you can resolve where there is consensus. And people like that because you can create a call to action list, you know, in the terms of, well, we agree on this, let's focus on this and move forward on these items. And it creates a record of the process so everyone is heard and hopefully feels heard, but more importantly, understands the actions that have come out that you can resolve and have consensus about. And even if it's a small little win, it's a big deal. Okay. So here's our example, and it goes back a bit, but to earlier in this year. My hope was, we'll see if it's happened, if I share the link again, that we would, you know, give you a quick 5 minutes here or something like that to go off in a chat and at least have 3 groups. There's room for a 4th group there to identify their own group. And the idea would be, use this article as a source to try and collect an actor and their interest. Like, what is their view on this subject? What is their hope will happen from that view if there's an outcome? Just grab text as if you're a qualitative researcher and type it in there. So I'm not sure. Yeah, the hope was that there'd be some names at the top here, but maybe I can bust it up with Chasten. I'll type in group 1, just some names that I'm seeing. You take maybe group 2, group 3.
What we can do, Peter, is we could create 3 or 4 groups if you wanted, and they'll just go into their own breakout rooms.
Sounds good.
Do you want to have like smaller groups or bigger groups? Like, would it be better to have 6 or 7 people in a group, or would it be better to have like 3 or 4 people in a group?
Well, however many people we have, if you divide it by 4, bare minimum, that would be good.
Okay, I'll do that. I'm going to put people into breakout groups then right now, and then they'll just naturally be in group 1, 2, 3, or 4, and they can go from there.
Okay. So however you want to work, folks, if that works, go into your groups and just type in your actors and interests from that source as if it was a qualitative interview or something representative of having happened in a town hall. And we'll see, we just want a big bag of interests from each actor. It could be a direct quote, full sentence, just copy and paste. Come back in about 5 minutes and we'll see if we've got anything in the document that we can start to cluster together and name using the method.
Okay, so I'm going to put you in the groups now, folks. And Peter, if you and I get dropped into a room, we'll just come back out if we need to, or you can stay in or what have you.
Sure.
Okay. Hey, Peter, you and I and Pandora are still in the main room here, so.
Okay. How much time do we have today?
I think we
had till 1:30.
Okay.
Chase, did you hit the stop record button now that you're?
Oh yeah, I will.
And then we pick.
Really applied yet. They've been theoretical and theory and methods only. So they're just starting to get into some applied stuff like what we're dealing with in this lecture.
Welcome back, everyone. You're back in the main room, or you will be soon. You probably are still on camera. If you don't want to be on camera, you may to mute yourself. Peter's just kind of tidying up the thoughts in the document. And I'm just going to do the folks who are still on mic the favor of muting their mics for them, so we don't get some feedback.
Sure, but it would be nice to have some engagement here, because basically I'm going to take 5 minutes and wrap things up and then open it up for questions. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. And do you want people to come on camera and mic when they have a question? That would be preferred, I think, right?
If they want to, I'm fine with just audio, whatever works for a person, for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so where we left off, it was great to see everyone get down some interests and actors. We've got things like a qualitative record now of discourse that we can use. This might have been the outcome of a first town hall, but if you have the time in the town hall to start grouping, clustering, and naming things, then you can build, even in that town hall, to an outcome. So that's what we're going to try and do here. And I'll just kind of open it up if you want to respond, anyone out there. What are some common interests that you saw? Like now, the next step in the model is to take the actors' names out of it. So definitely it's important to know the history and understand that there are hereditary elders and elected elders in terms of Indigenous relations. The rest of my slide deck gets a bit more into some strategies there for understanding Indigenous politics in terms of Indigenous relations. It could be between an organization or the Crown. But for now, we're going to pull out actors' names, and we're just going to focus on interests and see, are there any common things even being discussed? And some of them you see here are framed negatively right from the direct quotes, but they're still discussing something that's common. And group 4 is actually going to be a bit of an outlier here because they already have found what happened on this and how consensus was reached. But what are some common interests? Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute your mic. I'll just scroll up to the top and highlight something. Okay. So if we're trying to cluster things, we might take actor or information source number one, just as an example. And we got a big block here. If we're just using the symbol version, you know, it could be any symbol, and we would just want to highlight anything that might focus on laws. That might be something that's common, laws, regulations, and you just start to mark it up and say we're, you know, taking the personalities and actors out of it. And then we'll see if there's any agreement across actors. So we're right now just flagging keywords. Could even do, if we got a document here, a quick Control F. Oops, is this gonna work? Give me back. Here we go. Let's type in law. It keeps coming up, and we could flag that each time with a little symbol. And across the articles and groups, you can see, well, that could be one name of cluster that we come up with. Respect for the law, respect for the treaties, those sorts of things. Did anyone see other themes beyond the law that we might flag in a similar way to try and cluster or name things? No? Your supervisor's waiting, and they're
I need the cricket to, oh, there's somebody. Thank you, Darren.
cultural hierarchy, chiefs, yeah, who are the leaders? So you could identify key leaders so that we know that all the stakeholder groups are aligned. So that could be one other name, stakeholders. Legitimacy as well, who is legitimate, who is not, who does speak for everyone, who's opposed. Great. So I think you're starting to get the idea of how the model rolls out. So you can identify the actors, you can identify the interests, and then we could identify things like money. Money is another common one, as I said. And then you start to group them together and say, is there any agreement? And Group Forward is a great service because the agreement was reached, and you can see how that happens just from Group 4's source here. So we've already got a record of what happened here because of one of the sources that they found in the narwhal. Okay, well, hopefully that helps you imagine how something very theoretical can be put into a tactic and used successfully. Once you've named things, you can come up with an outcome. I've just got in these other slides, I'm going to present two other examples here, but there's a lot more in terms of Indigenous relations specifically, if it's an area of interest to or area of future practice. First off, preparing for worst case scenarios. Definitely focus on the interests and acknowledge emotions. So you say, it would be something like, we know you're angry or passionate about this, but we're trying to, get a dialogue down here. Please present whatever you want to speak to. We're going to record it, that kind of thing. Set the terms of the coalition meetings clearly so that whoever's at the mic gets to speak, that abuse won't be tolerated, and there might be security in the room. Any of those terms, depending on the level of trust. Protesters' policies. If someone is going to filibuster at the mic, that won't be allowed. If they go beyond time limits, those sorts of things. Provide timelines or next steps, so where you are in the whole process. And really, if you work in this area, I can't suggest enough protecting your vacation time and building your own resilience. You got to be able to be on when you're on, and if to do that, you need to have a healthy, balanced lifestyle, and totally protect that time to get back into a mental state where you can give as much energy to processes like this so that you can remain calm, cool, and collected when a crisis arrives. And like the current one, it's been going on forever. And I can tell you, since I've been working on strategies and helping groups since December, when it first started to rise in the media, and I had to take time off in the summer. I know I would not be able to speak to you today if I didn't do that to protect my own resiliency. Definitely, it's something I've learned from my mentors in this area. And the last example I'm just going to talk you through, there's a good article on low trust environments, that I had a guest speaker, Miles Leslie from UC Policy School, teaches at the grad level. He came and talked to our students, and I've used it ever since, because the article presents, the different worldviews of groups. And it's about setting quotas on hunting in Nunavut. And understanding the Indigenous worldview, so part of the information that was captured in a town hall there versus the Southern scientists, because we're all Southerners if we're not up in Nunavut, which was eye-opening for some of our students, was that I've used this example Dr. Leslie was talking about. So an Indigenous worldview of many Inuit hunters is that they are experts, but also that polar bears are sentient creatures, just like you or I. They have reason. And as soon as he said that, we're talking about a group of 30, 70 students. One student clearly, openly laughed, said, "People believe that?" And without missing a beat, Miles was like, "Well, you just lost your whole room and you lost your job. And least of all, the respect of everyone in the room, if you were collecting that information during a town hall." So just that learning in itself about how fast you can lose a room when you are there to hopefully create consensus-based supportive responses was one of the most powerful things that a lot of the students reported, of just saying, "Oh yeah, we're professionals. We have to respect everyone in the room. We have to understand everyone's worldviews and respect them." So a really good article on other ways to be resilient in what we do. And just to close off before I go to questions, I really just want to say thank you all for listening to today, and I hope it's helpful. Stay healthy out there. Stay safe, everyone. We can see the end coming, hopefully, with the vaccines in 2021. It's got to be a better year, right? It's got to be.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Peter. That was awesome, and I really appreciated how it went from the theoretical to the practice, and then kind of branched back out to the theoretical again. So I think it's a really great reminder for us that theory matters and practice matters, and that they should both be informing each other. Especially in programs like yours at MRU and ours at Royal Roads. So I would really encourage folks to ask some questions here. We have Peter for another 10 or 15 minutes, and great resource. So please just come on mic and introduce yourself and ask a question or make a comment.
I saw in the chat, Barb requested going to slide 21, so I did that. And maybe I'll talk a bit about this, and that you're looking for, if you're trying to build consensus between two groups that might not agree, like the scientists wanted a quota because of less sea ice, wanting to protect bears. On the other side, the Inuit definitely want to keep hunting. It's their way of life. So to build trust, you have to find those interests that overlap. And eventually the article does talk about what they came to in terms of a quota system. Thank you, folks. Anyone that's taken off?
Peter, I'll lead us because I have a couple questions for you. Just something that I've been thinking about, and again, everyone has their opinion about this, but I was driving, down by the, I can't remember, it was the BC Health Ministry or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And of course there was this group of folks there protesting masks and the vaccine and so on is sort of top of mind. Do you see that this process could be something that could be used to try to reach people who are in, is there a spectrum? I guess the question is there like a spectrum of reasonable or rational kind of discourse, and that there's a sort of line by which people just exit that and and there's another strategy that needs to be taken into account. Like, can we use this kind of consensus building to build trust with people who are so far outside of the overlap, or am I making judgment already on those groups?
Well, and even this process you can think through as being often it will just be targeted as, oh, the government's not really going to listen, they're just going through the motions. At this point, people are so skeptical. But I think if it's done professionally, communicated well, and all the information is open, that is the goal, is that we did listen to try to build consensus between two groups, especially in this one case, this current slide, where it's the Southern scientists would not be the majority in this case, right? But building links among multiple minorities that aren't as heard as a majority in other cases, so that would be the Coastal Link example that we kind of worked through. That's even more important. You know, to build that low trust, everyone's got to be heard. There's got to be a record of it. But if there are groups, you know, when we talk about the alt-right or alt-left, and the concerns of things becoming dangerous in a meeting, yeah, that's where you have to have clear terms and limits that this is how security will be used, this is how protesters will be dealt with. We want articulate, diplomatic, conscious, rational debate here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a question from Rachel. Does that help explain it? That you do have to have clear limits.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
What are the strategies when trust has historically been broken? How do you get people to come to the table? The biggest example I think we know about is the TRC. So we're looking internationally. I'll talk. So my family background is Irish on my dad's side, French on my mom's side. So the Troubles in Ireland is a case I frequently use, but in my own family as well, my brother's wife is Treaty 7. And so we talk about, you know, how do you heal these low trust environments, but the TRC is one of the most powerful ones. And even if we look at what has happened in South Africa with re-amplified tensions there, like Ireland, the TRC seems to have worked, right? It seems that if you go to Ireland today, having an official record of the Troubles has helped people. And somehow they figured out that, oh, like we could be French Canadians or English speaking Canadians. They're like, oh, I can be Irish Protestant or I can be Irish Catholic. We can all be Irish. That's just two groups. But when we have over 600 First Nations in Canada, that becomes far more difficult, right? It's far more complex and nuanced when you go into negotiations there. Really have to think of it as each nation having, unless they're working together, they could have different interests based off of the size. So that's why that is such a complex problem for Canada, of course. And the difference between BC and Alberta, where in BC, none of the lands were ceded, treaties weren't signed. So there's a difference across Canada in terms of those levels of government negotiations. So if negotiations have broken down, to respond to Rachel's question directly, having people come to the table, it has to be seen as the highest goal for everyone to be heard, and that the most trusted and respected people are organizing it. It can't just be anyone just doing it. So it really has to be made official with clear goals of what's going to come out of it. So the TRC would possibly, in some of the literature, be the most involved form of an action coalition framework, if that helps. Any other questions? Well, you got me, folks? And I'm good to answer afterwards. Feel free to link in with me or email me. My Twitter handle is PR Networks if you're on there. And if there's no rush, these are the 2 busiest weeks of marking out of the year for me every year. Wait till January if you really want some help. But I'm glad we got to do this today. Hopefully it was helpful and gave you some food for thought in your grad studies.
Thanks, Peter, and do appreciate coming in the last sort of weeks of term. Royal Roads, we run a little bit differently, so we got a little bit blind to the fact that folks in this is the sort of crunch time. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us all here, and I'm sure you'll get a couple of emails and maybe even some future requests. Oh, we got a question coming from Lou. Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
Hi, folks. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulties finding how to put my hand up with my iPhone. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, and not so much a quote. One thing you remarked earlier was the very limited amount of resources that are put into our field. How do you, I guess it's an eternal question, how do we as PR practitioners effectively impress or the value of our work and the importance of doing this kind of work to all of the higher ups in our world?
Well, I should modify, just to respond to you quickly, if we go back to that slide, this, where the money is being put is still in PR, but it's just these high-level engagements to get things done effectively. Let me just try and find where we were there. I lost it. To get those percent, there it is. Okay, so, oh, you can't see it. I stopped sharing my screen. Generally, it just says, so 5% out of all of the usual kind of stakeholder engagement that's being done is not transformational or integrative. Those ones that take two-way communication, multiple interactions. But PR, we're still a part of most major corporations. So all it's just saying is that a lot of the C-suite will focus on easy wins, like we'll just do one-off engagements, transactional engagements. We'll focus on marketing and sales, community events, and internal employee HR engagement that PR might be involved in the messaging, those sorts of things. So really, I'm just saying this is a huge opportunity. That's how it should be communicated. And if you use that menu option model, you can say, this is what we get if we just do transactional, and you're missing out on all these other options. And if we give examples of the best stakeholder engagements, if it needs it, if it's going to be a big win for an organization, making it clear to them that no one showed up at your meeting or our ads didn't work that well. It's because it was just a one-off thing. It was a poor strategy. We still have these two other options that we can use. I already created them. And then they listen to you. So it's always about the value add, right? If they're just asking for the one-off briefing note, news release, or something like that, then you just stay in that one lane of transactional. But if you build it out further, then they can say, okay, we can now visualize where we're going to go. Here's the money.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for your question. Well, folks, I have a meeting with Jane McNichol here in a little bit, and I really appreciate the time for those that stayed on. You know how to find me, though.
Say hi to Jane for me, Peter, and thanks again for the time and great talk. And I'm sure we'll send you an invite to come back maybe with our undergrads in January.
Well, full disclosure, you came to my class, so
It's true.
We'll get you back too.
Yeah, anytime. Happy to do it.
Thanks again.
Okay, have a great day and stay safe.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye now.